When we talk about fairness, about justice in society, it seems like we're constantly appealing to three different, almost competing standards. Are we talking about what people need just to survive and flourish? Or is it about what they deserve for their effort, their contribution?
Or is it simply about our fundamental equality as people?
Exactly. And David Miller's landmark book, Principles of Social Justice, it forces us to accept that the answer isn't just one of these, it's all three. The real trick is knowing which one applies and where.
It's such a crucial intervention, really, because it tries to ground justice in the messy reality of how we actually live. So many theories of justice look for that one single metric.
A silver bullet.
A silver bullet, a principle to rule them all. Miller just steps back and says, let's look at how people actually judge these situations in their daily lives.
Absolutely. And for those of you joining us for this conversation, welcome. We're trying a bold new take on book coverage with this extended analysis. It's more than just a summary, though. We'll cover that too.
We're really examining how the author shapes his argument, how he builds influence, and how he earns or sometimes loses your trust.
The goal is to give you the tools to read with a sharper insight and greater discernment. So should you read this book? This should help. It's also, I think, excellent for aspiring writers.
And if you find this expanded format valuable, we'd really love to hear from you. Your feedback helps guide our future content.
It's also worth mentioning you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for a deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
So our mission today is to unpack Miller's project. He's stepping into a world, political philosophy, that's often dominated by these highly idealized, very abstract frameworks.
You mean like Rawlsian liberalism or, on the other end, pure libertarianism?
Exactly. And Miller argues that these abstract structures, they often feel detached. They set up principles that just ignore the messy, value-laden judgments that ordinary people make every day when they call something fair or unfair.
Right, if you read some of these theories, the demands they place on society seem, well, politically impossible.
His whole purpose, then, is to build a realistic, empirically informed pluralism. He wants to take our common intuitions about justice, need, desert, and equality and build them into a coherent whole.
And ultimately, to defend the moderate welfare state as the right institutional expression of that idea.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's start with the architecture of the book. This is the summary part that really provides the foundation for the analysis to come. Miller's central move, as you said, is that justice is plural.
It's plural and it's context-dependent. A theory that's going to work, he says, has to respect three irreducible families of justice claims: need, desert, and equality.
And the key isn't just naming them. It's his strategy for contextualizing them. He connects each principle to a very specific mode of social relationship.
That's how he avoids contradiction. He basically compartmentalizes our moral lives. He says different principles apply in different settings.
So let's walk through those relationships. First up is the principle of need. Miller says this governs the solidaristic community.
Right, and this is the relationship of our shared humanity.
Yeah.
It's where the vulnerability of being a human being, an embodied being, really takes center stage. We all face illness, aging, basic physical requirements.
And this isn't about charity, is it?
Oh.
He's very clear on that.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Charity is optional. Justice is obligatory. In a solidaristic community, we owe each other basic provisions: food, shelter, medical care. Not out of generosity, but because it's required for us to recognize each other as equals.
Like in a natural disaster, the first thing we do is distribute resources based on who needs the most.
Exactly. That's the principle in its purest form.
Okay, so moving beyond just basic survival, we get to the realm of cooperation. This is desert.
And this principle governs what he calls instrumental association. So think of workplaces, businesses, any collective project where people are cooperating to achieve a shared goal.
And here, justice is tied directly to contribution, to effort and skill.
Yes, it reflects our agency as contributors. If you and I are partners on a project, and I put in 90% of the work, my feeling that I deserve a larger share of the reward, that's completely rational in this context. The whole point of the association is productivity.
That makes sense. And finally, the third principle, equality.
This governs the relationship of citizenship.
And this is more than just treating everyone the same. It's about equal status, equal civil and political rights, the right to vote, free speech. But he adds something else.
He adds social rights. And this is key. Social rights sufficient to make those formal political rights substantively usable.
Meaning?
Well, if you have the right to petition the government, but you're so worried about where your next meal is coming from, or you're so poorly educated you can't navigate the system, that formal right is pretty much hollow.
So the institutional result he's defending is the welfare state, universal health care, education, basic income support. All of it is justified as fulfilling the demands of equal citizenship.
Exactly. It's about mutual recognition within that political community.
It's a very clean map, actually. He takes what seem like contradictory feelings, we should treat everyone equally, but also reward different levels of effort. And he just shows that they belong in different rooms of our moral house.
And that's a perfect transition, because now I can analyze how he tries to convince us this map is the right one. And he doesn't just rely on abstract moral logic. He positions himself as a reasonable, empirically grounded pluralist.
This is the genius of his strategy, I think, the empirical anchoring. He actually uses people's considered judgments, even looking at survey research about public attitudes toward fairness.
It's a deliberate rhetorical move. It's designed to undercut those highly revisionist theories like, say, extreme utilitarianism that might just dismiss what the public actually thinks is fair. He's claiming a kind of democratic legitimacy.
By saying, my theory reflects how thoughtful citizens actually talk about justice, he's building a case for political feasibility. He doesn't want a perfect theory that can never be implemented.
He wants a theory that can actually work.
But I have to ask, if he's grounding his theory in what people already think, isn't that just? Incredibly conservative. Isn't he using what's popular as a limit on what should be just?
That is the tightrope he walks. And he addresses this with a philosophical tool called reflective equilibrium. He doesn't just rubber stamp popular opinion.
Okay, so how does that work?
He starts with those diverse public judgments, the patterns of need, desert, equality he observes. Then he systematizes them, but critically, he revises them if they contradict his broader principles or each other.
So it's a back and forth process. You take the raw data of public opinion and you test it against your core principles until you get a coherent theory.
Precisely. The goal is to find a balance between logical consistency and public acceptability, and that whole structure reinforces the argument's appeal. Feels sober, incremental, not utopian.
He's modeling a kind of civic-minded, evidence-sensitive philosophy.
If you're enjoying this analysis of Miller's methodology, remember this is just one of many deep dives we offer. You can check out Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel, for more AI book analyses, summaries, and critiques, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
Okay, so we've laid out the claims and the method. Now for the really interesting part, the analysis of the tensions this framework creates. Because anytime you try to neatly systematize something as messy as pluralism, you're going to run into conflicts.
For sure. The first major tension is that one between pluralism and unity. Miller is explicitly against monism, the one principle idea, but he's still trying to create a systematic, integrated theory. The problem is what happens when all three principles seem relevant in the same space.
Which happens all the time in modern life. Let's take the example of disability in the workplace. A workplace is an instrumental association governed by desert.
Right.
But an employee who needs expensive accommodations to do their job immediately introduces the principle of need, which is based on their vulnerability.
Exactly. And the principles clash. If the accommodations cost more than the value of their contribution, the principle of desert might say the company shouldn't have to hire them. But need, often backed up by laws about equality of status, demands the accommodation.
So the theory has to implicitly prioritize one over the other. The moment you say, okay, in this case, need trumps desert, you're sort of reintroducing a hierarchy, a higher order principle that the theory officially resists.
You are. The real world is just too messy for a one principle per relationship rule. Critics point out that real economies have both need-based severance packages right alongside desert-based bonuses. The lines are blurry.
And that blurriness leads to the second big tension, which is the logical one, the eyes-on slide. We talked about how he relies on popular attitudes.
Yes, as a constraint on what a plausible theory can be.
But that risks smuggling normative authority into descriptive data. If we rely too much on the is of public opinion, where does the push for moral reform, the idealong, come from?
Think about it historically. Before the civil rights movement, widespread public judgment in many places was dead set against racial integration. If a theorist had relied on that considered judgment to define justice,
Their theory would have just ended up ratifying a deeply unfair system.
precisely. Now, Miller would argue reflective equilibrium is supposed to filter that out, but the tension is still there. How much should popular and potentially unfair views constrain our pursuit of what is actually just? you risk political stagnation.
That's a fundamental challenge for any philosophy that wants to be politically relevant. And this brings us to the third tension, which might be the most difficult one politically. It's about bounded scope and global justice.
Miller focuses heavily on justice within a defined society. He defends equality primarily through national citizenship rights.
Which creates what critics call the partiality problem. This focus on national citizenship can seriously underplay our duties to people or other countries, and global egalitarianism in general.
Right. If justice is mainly about your status within a specific political community, it risks creating this huge moral blind spot to global inequality, to the plight of migrants.
And it seems to contradict his own logic. If the principle of need is based on our universal vulnerability as human beings, why does its application suddenly stop at a national border? The need of a refugee fleeing a war is just as real as the need of a poor citizen at home.
It absolutely clashes with cosmopolitan intuitions, the idea that every human being is owed a baseline of rights and recognition no matter their passport. Miller's counter is essentially about feasibility. He argues that a state's primary enforceable obligation is to its own citizens.
Because you need a shared political framework to actually distribute resources and enforce rights.
For him, yes, he'd say we have universal humanitarian duties like charity for famine relief, but that justice, these binding duties of need, desert, and equality, requires a shared social context to function.
So regardless of where you land on that global question, the framework itself is still incredibly valuable.
I think so, because it forces us to see the purpose behind each principle. The triad tracks three essential aspects of human dignity: our vulnerability, need, our agency, desert, and our equal standing as persons, equality.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this? Miller's contextual pluralism is a huge move beyond these one-size-fits-all ideas of justice. It helps explain why reasonable people appeal to different principles when they're talking about family versus the market versus their civic duties.
It gives you a tool, really, a tool for identifying and challenging the underlying principle being used in any discussion about fairness. When someone demands equality, you can now ask, equality of what? When they talk about what someone deserves, you can ask, based on what contribution?
And when they appeal to need, you can ask, what is the community that's being invoked here that creates this obligation?
The success of the book isn't in giving us a perfect, seamless theory. It's in structuring the debate itself, showing that these three distinct moral perspectives have to be reconciled for justice to feel legitimate in a complex society.
But that leaves us with a final provocative thought. Miller's theory ties the principle of equality so tightly to the idea of citizenship within one society. If the central promise of his book is democratic legitimacy, we have to ask,
does justice only require us to figure out what we owe our neighbors, the people inside our political borders? Or does the universal logic of need actually compel us to look much, much further?
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via the link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.